Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, August 19th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news, and in the mailbag, we'll be responding to some letters about Neill Blomkamp and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on this podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
And Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
So people out there may have noticed that we did not have an episode on Friday. News was just slow, and we're going to have some extra episodes this week probably because of D23 Expo, which starts this Friday in Anaheim, and I'm going to be there. So if you are going to D23 Expo and you see me on the show floor or running around, please say hi, and look forward to that coverage then. But let's dive into the news. There's some stories that hit over the weekend. Your title as weekend editor, Brad, was you actually got some mileage out of it this weekend because there was news of a Masters of the Universe sequel that's coming from Kevin Smith. Tell us about it, Brad.
Yes, on Sunday evening, there was an announcement of a new animated series called Masters of the Universe Revelation, which will act as a sequel series to the original He-Man and the Masters of the Universe series that ended back in 1985. Unlike the original series, this will be an anime-style series. Kevin Smith has specifically said it will have some of the most metal-style versions of these characters that we've seen from Powerhouse Animation. It's the same animation house that worked on Netflix's Castlevania series. And the official synopsis from Netflix reads this. Featuring fan favorites He-Man, Orko, Cringer, and Man-at-Arms, the story pits our heroic warriors and guardians of Castle Grayskull against Skeletor, Evelyn, Beastman, and the vile legions of Snake Mountain. But after a ferocious final battle forever fractures Eternia, it's up to Teela to solve the mystery of the missing Sword of Power in a race against time to prevent the end of the universe. Her journey will uncover the secrets of Grayskull at last. This is the epic He-Man and the Masters of the Universe saga fans have waited 35 years to see. So yeah, that's the basic setup for this new Masters of the Universe series, and I don't know if it's just me, but this kind of sounds like the Force Awakens version of Masters of the Universe. I don't know how prominent He-Man's going to be, but this kind of makes it seem like he's not maybe the main character in this series, and that he might be gone for a little bit, a la Luke Skywalker, and maybe Teela has to find her after finding where the Sword of Power is.
Yeah. Were you a big fan of Masters of the Universe as a kid?
Honestly, I was much more in tune with the live-action Masters of the Universe movie than I was the animated series. For whatever reason, the animated series was never really in my, preferred viewing of cartoons when I was a kid. But I did really like the live-action Masters of the Universe series, even though it's almost nothing like the actual animated series, as I have found out, in years since then. So I don't necessarily have a special reverence for it. I still had some He-Man action figures, mostly just the main He-Man action figure and Skeletor. But yeah, that's so I don't have too much of a familiarity with the original animated series.
Ben, what about you?
I completely missed the He-Man animated series train when I was younger. I did see that Dolph Lundgren live-action movie, I think because people were like, you have to see Frank Langella as Skeletor. And I was like, that does sound like something I need to see. And that movie, I mean, I don't know, Brad, when you saw it, but if you saw it as a child, then I can totally get how you could be sucked up in it. But I caught it very late, like, I don't know, age 30 or something, and was like, what the hell is this? So, yeah, I'm totally, all of this He-Man stuff is over my head.
Over your head. Skeletor from that live-action movie used to haunt my dreams as a kid. Like, it was so scary. I did watch Masters of the Universe, although I couldn't really tell you much about it. I had some of the action figures. Brad, was this one of the shows that they created action figures and then they basically created the show to sell the action figures. I believe that's the case, right?
Yeah, from what I remember, I think that's exactly what happened. That they had these action figures, and they're like, well, now we have to have a show so that people will want to buy them.
That's so ridiculous. I feel like that would never happen today, or maybe it would. I don't know. But people love Masters of the Universe. Like, people have been craving for a He-Man movie, and that's been in the works for like a decade now and has not been happening. You know, I'm sure people are going to be excited for this. Netflix is going all in on these like anime style IP properties. Like you mentioned, they did they did Godzilla. The company that did this did the Castlevania, right?
Yeah, Powerhouse Animation is the ones who did Castlevania.
Yeah, so those must be really popular on the Netflix streaming
platform.
And
I actually just realized, I don't think I mentioned this, but Kevin Smith is the one who is working on this series as an executive producer, showrunner, and writer for the show.
Kevin Smith last year was going around saying that he just got attached to something that was like the biggest thing in his career, biggest property in his career. Is it this?
You know, I'm honestly not sure. It could be, because his exact quote was that he said it would. Hold on, let me find it here. It is the biggest budgeted anything I've ever done, and the most massive IP I've ever been allowed to play with. And like, it's tough to say whether or not he was talking about within the realm of like film and television, because he has worked on things like Batman and Daredevil. As a comic book writer, but never in like the TV or film direction phase. But he has also directed episodes of Supergirl and The Flash. And I'm not sure that I would say that Masters of the Universe is a bigger IP than any of those things. It's very popular for sure. And I don't know, unless the budget on this animated series is really big, I don't know. It seems like it could be, but I don't necessarily feel 100% certain about that.
I mean, animation does not come cheap, Brad, so...
Right.
Yeah, and do we know how many episodes this is? How many episodes does, like, a typical Netflix animated series run?
I'm actually not too sure as far as the more dramatic animated shows go. I know the comedic ones are usually around 10 or 12 episodes, but it doesn't look like we have any indication as to how many episodes this will be. But it is a limited series, so it won't be a long one.
Okay, speaking of fan anticipation, fans out there have been anticipating the Snyder cut of Justice League, not almost, to an obnoxious degree. We're sick and tired of hearing about this, honestly. But it seems like it actually exists, and Jason Momoa has seen it. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, so in a recent Instagram post, Jason Momoa, in his comments, he basically says, yes, I have seen the Snyder Cut. He thanked Zack Snyder for showing it to him. And he also said, the Snyder Cut is sick. So that was his one-word review of this movie. He added a hashtag to his Instagram post that said, lucky for me, sucks for you. So I guess, I mean, I don't know how involved Jason Momoa might be in any potential conversations about possible distribution for this thing. It seems like he would, that would be way outside of the realm of whatever, his involvement might be in this. But this basically just, again, confirms that a cut does exist, even though I think Kevin Smith, you were just talking about Kevin Smith, but I think it was just a couple weeks ago, he talked about how there is a cut. It's not a mythical thing. It does not exist in a finished form. This is basically what we've been saying since the very beginning. I just looked back through the Slash Film archives, and I remember writing an article saying that the Snyder Cut doesn't exist. And I was talking about a finished version with, VFX and all of that stuff. And I think that's still true. Like, that version of this movie does not exist because Warner Brothers would have to spend more money to actually get it to that place. But apparently there is a version that's floating around out there that Zack Snyder is just showing people, apparently, his friends and co-workers. So, yeah, we assume that has, like, heavy animatics and a lot of sort of space where you have to fill in the gaps for yourself. But there is one more person on planet Earth who has now seen the Snyder Cut of Justice League.
So also, I have to say, Ben, I don't think that you did Jason Momoa's one-word review justice, because if you look at his Instagram, he actually says he saw it and it's sick.
Yeah, that you're right. You're absolutely right, and I'm so glad I didn't, because now that meant that we got to hear it from you, and that was way better than I could have done.
Yeah. I guess the big question now is: are other people going to be able to see the Snyder cut outside of the Snyder inner circle? Like, do you think Warner Brothers will ever release this? Like, when we first started talking about this, I said no. I feel like I said at the time that there's no incentive for Warner Brothers to release this thing, because if it's good, it makes the studio brass look bad for basically what happened. And if it's bad, it just is another failure on the utility belt of DC at Warner Brothers. But since that time, the brass in Warner Brothers has changed, and the new brass maybe doesn't care if something that doesn't put the old brass in a golden colored light is out there.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
And I guess there's also the thing about you're talking about like the executives maybe looking bad, but the situation surrounding Justice League was pretty fraught. Like, Zack Snyder's daughter took her own life, and he had to leave the movie because of that, and then Joss Whedon came in and sort of finished it off. So it's not necessarily as cut and dried as a studio executive made the call to made a call that could have resulted in this quote unquote Snyder cut, but then the studio executive decided to make it a Joss Whedon. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So maybe there is a chance that people will see this and no heads will roll at the corporate level. And that's obviously something that would be a concern for them. So I don't know.
I
Brad,
think
what do you think?
Especially with HBO Go or HBO Max. Yeah, HBO Max coming out. Like, I feel like if you wanted to get the Snyder Bros to subscribe to that new streaming service, maybe put the Snyder Cut on there.
I was wondering about that, and I speculated about that in the article. And then after I published it, I was wondering if it actually might make more sense for them not to put it on a streaming service and target those fans specifically, and basically force them to pay a separate cost just for that thing, because really they're the only people that care about this in a serious way, right? They're the only ones who have been banging the drum on this thing for 2 years. So if you're Warner Brothers, why not try to milk as much as possible out of it instead of essentially including it for quote unquote free within the archives of a streaming service,
Yeah, the only way to get this to watch the Snyder Cut is you have to sign up for a year of HBO Max.
Yeah, I mean, I would not be surprised if something like that happened.
Brad, do you think we'll ever get the Snyder Cut?
I don't think so. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean,
why not? We got the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2, and he was, not even.
Yeah, but that movie didn't require millions of dollars to complete special effects for a movie that has plenty of shots that are composed entirely of computer effects. I just feel like it's not worth it for Warner Brothers to spend that kind of money to finish this movie. And much like the vocal voices for those who are upset about Star Wars: The Last Jedi are the ones that you hear the most because they're the loudest, I feel like this contingent of people who want to see the Snyder Cut is not nearly as big as it seems like. It just seems that they're just always talking about it.
I mean, I agree with you there, and I'm not sure it's worth finishing this movie. I'm gonna estimate there's probably 15 to 20% of this movie that's not, of the Snyder Cut that's not done. But that said, animatics nowadays look pretty good. They're almost like an animated film in itself, and I feel like maybe they could just release it with the animatics.
What do you think, Peter? Do you think that's actually likely?
I don't know. I'm not sure if it's likely they'll release with the animatics, but I feel like by the end of our lifetimes, we will have seen the Snyder Cut officially released in some way. There's money to be made. Whenever there's money to be made, they're not gonna just let it sit there. But it's just a matter of when and how soon. Okay, let's move on from DC to Marvel. Let's talk about Venom 2. They have hired a cinematographer. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, Robert Richardson, the cinematographer of several of Quentin Tarantino's movies, has been hired to shoot Venom 2. So, I mean, that's kind of an amazing get for them. Andy Serkis has officially been brought on to direct. We talked about that a little while ago. And now Robert Richardson is shooting this thing. And just for people who may not know, just a small list of his incredible career includes movies like Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2, The Aviator, Inglourious Bastards, Shutter Island, Hugo, The Hateful Eight, Django Unchained, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Casino, JFK. I mean, this guy has shot some like full-blown classics, and the idea that Sony would hire him for Venom 2 of all things, I guess maybe indicates that they're trying to make this movie really good.
Why do you think this guy would be interested in Venom 2 other than the paycheck?
Yeah, that's the interesting thing that I was sort of wondering about. I wonder if if Andy Serkis, especially considering how performance capture heavy he is, and he has a whole company that consults on a lot of big budget movies where he, because he's like one of the pioneers in that field, he's so keyed into the requirements and necessities of that specific subset of movie making. I'm wondering if he has some big plans in that area for Venom 2, and if Richardson has not really encountered that yet in his career, and if he's looking at this as an opportunity to sort of just like push his own boundaries a little bit and do some new things and step into a new arena. Like Caleb Deschanel, who is a cinematographer who shot a ton of really, really great like classical movies going back 40, 50 years or whatever. He was the guy who collaborated with Jon Favreau on The Lion King and shot that movie entirely digitally and with the VR stuff and all of that. We talked about that when that movie was coming out. So I think maybe the same kind of vibe could be coming off here. Like Richardson just wants to push himself a little bit.
Possibly. I'm interested to see what turns up of Venom 2. Let's move on to our last story for today. Let's talk. You mentioned before, Brad, that maybe Warner Brothers is trying to sell HBO Go or HBO Max. I keep on calling it HBO Go. I hate this name. Maybe Warner Brothers is trying to sell this HBO Max, and they're trying to get people to a 1-year commitment to see the Snyder cut. And I think you were joking about the story that's coming up here, and this is Disney and Disney's own streaming service, Disney Plus, which, by the way, at D23 Expo this weekend is going to be selling an early package of Disney Plus to people at the convention, but you have to commit to 3 years of the service, which is kind of insane. But I guess Disney is going to, unlike Netflix and unlike HBO, where people are sharing their passwords and stuff like that, Disney is aiming to crack down on password sharing. What do we know, Brad?
Yes. So in a recent press release announcing a distribution programming deal between Charter Communications, which is the media company behind Spectrum cable subscriptions, Disney and Charter announced that they're partnering up for this programming deal, but then casually mentioned that they were also working together on piracy mitigation, including specifically addressing issues such as unauthorized access and password sharing. So it sounds like Disney is pretty keen on figuring out how to stop people from sharing passwords and allowing multiple people to access the same account for access to streaming programs, which is something that people have been doing since Netflix started their Instant Watch. People do it with Hulu all the time, Amazon Prime, you name it. If there's a streaming service, people are sharing passwords for it. And it sounds like these two want to stop that. It's unclear if this is something that they're working on to stop password sharing specifically for this deal between them. So because Ars Technica, which is a tech blog, theorizes that the way that they might try to do this is tracking users' IP addresses and cross-checking them between the cable company and their Disney Plus subscription, so they can see if it's the same person using the each of the subscriptions when they log in. So it's not clear if this is something that will be an overarching initiative to stop, but since it is kind of a problem for a lot of streaming services because they're essentially missing out on plenty of subscription dollars by allowing people to share, And I'll put allowing in quotes since they're not actively saying, yeah, it's okay to do this. But, so I feel like this is something that maybe a lot of streaming services will start to crack down on, especially as the, streaming wars start to heat up and we keep getting more and more streaming subscriptions announced every other week.
I was reading the other day an article about how a majority of millennials are still on their parents, who are adults, are still on their parents' cell phone plans. And I feel like the same case is with like HBO subscriptions and Netflix subscriptions. Like I hear that a lot of people like sharing, that account. I just don't know how do you police this, because like, I guess if I have charter communications, like if I'm traveling to Hawaii and I try to access Disney Plus from there, are they going to penalize me because I'm not at home and I'm on a business trip?
No, that's a good question, and that's probably a question for somebody who knows a lot more about how the internet works than I do. But yeah, that does seem like it would be an issue, especially when you have, it's so common now to have multiple profiles on certain accounts too, and somebody who may very well share a household with somebody may just be using Hulu on the go, and they're using their own profile somewhere while somebody else is watching it at home, and it's another similar problem.
Yeah, I don't know how to solve this problem, and I feel like Disney, if they really want to take advantage of the streaming game, shouldn't be pissing off people this early. But they've also announced their list of compatible devices for the launch of Disney Plus. What do we know there?
Indeed, yeah. So there's a big announcement today came from Disney Plus as far as the first international territories that will receive the service alongside the United States debut. And funnily enough, one of the major devices that is not included in this list as of now are all of Amazon's Fire devices. So if you have a Fire Stick or a Fire Cube or a Fire Tablet or a Bonfire, whatever Amazon has now, you won't be able to access Disney Plus on it as it is now. Right now it's Apple TV, Android mobile devices, Android TV, Chromecast, any desktop web browser, iPad, iPhone, PlayStation 4, Roku TV, and Xbox One are the devices that will be able to use Disney Plus. Now, that doesn't mean that won't change in the coming months because Disney Plus doesn't debut until November 12th. So there's always a chance that they're still figuring out a deal with Amazon and how that's going to work, and just working on the software for it and that kind of thing. So if you have an Amazon device and you want Disney Plus, don't worry just yet. Wait and see how the next couple months play out, and this is something that may not be cause for concern.
I wonder if this is an anti-competitive move, because I know Amazon has done that in the past. Like they had some issues with who was it? Like Google with the Nest devices, and also Apple. Like they weren't selling Apple devices on Amazon because there was this big feud between Apple and Amazon. Like
there was a feud between Disney and Amazon at one point too regarding home video stuff. There was and actually even still, Amazon doesn't have pre-orders available for Disney Blu-rays and DVDs. And at one time it was hard to even search them to find them in Amazon's on Amazon's website. So I don't know if there's maybe some carryover and some bad blood there, but we'll see how it goes.
That's crazy. Okay, let's move into the mailbag. First, we have a letter from Haitham from Egypt. He writes in about our August 15th episode where we were discussing the RoboCop news, and we brought up Neill Blomkamp, and Chris basically dismissed him as a bad filmmaker. Haitham says, while I agree Blomkamp's filmography is bad, I don't think the guy keeps falling upwards or the implication that he's a hack. I find Blomkamp to be an interesting filmmaker with one major flaw. He's a technical and visually driven director who puts a tremendous effort and attention to detail and image and has total command and control over it, yet he has no sense of storytelling. He compares him to Gareth Edwards and Zack Snyder. He says Blomkamp's approach to action and spectacle is very uniquely his own. It has his intention, clear point of view. It doesn't just go for the flashy, overstimulating amounts of visual noise. While his style feels influenced by video game cutscenes, it's done in a way that is dynamic and shows understanding of the cinematic medium. If you get a chance to check out any of the art of the movie book of one of his films, you'll see how deep and fledged his approach to the process is. So, what do you guys say? Do you think Chris was overly dismissing Blomkamp here, or like does he have a point here? I don't think Blomkamp's a hack, because I feel like usually in the terms of hack, like hack is visually bland. It is, appealing to the masses. It doesn't have its own style, or like I feel like I can tell what a Blomkamp movie is. If you put a movie from Blomkamp that I have never seen in front of me, I'd be like, oh, this is Blomkamp. But I do agree that he's not good. What do you guys think?
I don't remember Chris calling him a hack specifically, but I do know that he was very down on him as a filmmaker. And even Hi Sam from Egypt says in this email, he sort of like hides the thing in his own criticism here. He says Blomkamp is an interesting filmmaker with one flaw: he has no sense of storytelling. Like, the problem is you need to have a good sense of storytelling to be a good filmmaker. So yes, I agree that his visuals are outstanding, and like, he is, to me, much better suited to stuff like video game cutscenes and brief commercials, and maybe even just crafting images, maybe just like still photography with like incredible visual effects in the background and world building and all that stuff, just like creating evocative sets. But I agree that he doesn't really have a great sense of storytelling, and that is a huge component of being a good filmmaker.
Brad, how do you fall in Neill Blomkamp?
I mean, I'm pretty much in the same field. He does have a unique visual style, and he does have this amazing attention to technical details, and really bringing stories to life with fantastic visual effects. But it's like Hi Sam even says, he doesn't have any knack for storytelling and doing it in an interesting or compelling way. I think Chappie is a perfect example of that. Something where the elements that created Chappie are very well done and well executed, and he has some sense of how to make a movie visually interesting, but there's just something about the narrative where he just can't make it connect with the audience, and that's unfortunately that's a big part of what makes a talented filmmaker. And if he's missing that element, then it's going to mess up anything else that he has that he's actually good at.
I also think he has some good ideas in terms of like the concept and messaging of the film, but then it seems like there's not a producer there, or he doesn't have a confident or people around him to tell him how to keep it more subtle. Like, I feel like at times it's like very like, hitting us over a hammer with it, where it would be better if it was more. I mean, even District 9, I don't think is that subtle, but I think it's more subtle than his other films. So, anyways, okay, we have some responses to our Once Upon a Time in Hollywood spoiler discussion. If you have not seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you can probably turn off the podcast right now. But we'll get to these emails. Both of the emails wrote in the last 24 hours. I don't want to seem like I'm reading emails that are emailing in to support my view and not other people in this podcast. But these are just the two emails that we got in on this film in the last 24 hours. So, Gokul, is that how you pronounce his name? We've said this so fast. Gokul from Auckland, New Zealand. He's written in before. He wrote in response to our spoiler discussion and how we were talking about. I brought up the point that if people don't know about the Manson murderers, that the whole escalation of this movie does not make any sense. That like you really do not know where this is headed, or the climax does not have as much emotional pull. And Gokul does back up my point here. He saw this. By the way, these two people, the reason why we're getting emails about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood now is it's finally hitting overseas. Like, there was a delay in the release dates. So people are finally seeing it over there. He says, I thought I would share my thoughts from a perspective of someone who was brought up outside of the United States and who wasn't around when these events occurred. Personally, I think the movie actually requires you to do some homework and learn about Tate and the Mansons. My girlfriend and I both saw the movie together, and while I had some cursory knowledge of the events, my girlfriend was going in blind, as this era in American history is not taught in New Zealand curriculum. What that meant was the build up to the end and the anticipation of what was going to happen was kind of wasted on my girlfriend. I mean, she knew that something could happen to Rick and Cliff, but the added dread about what could happen to Sharon was simply missing for her. In fact, she couldn't understand what the point of Tate's role was in the film. To my girlfriend, it just seemed like the audience was falling around her, seeing her day-to-day life for no reason and with no real payoff. This was probably compounded by the fact that Robbie did not have a lot of dialogue or even a seemingly arc compared to Dalton or Cliff. I would say that the sweetness and sensitivity felt towards Tate was mainly due to what the audience knows happens to her, and so the little moments of Tate took on added meaning. Since I have a vague idea of her story, her role made more sense to me. And we also had an email from Phil who wrote in. He's in Europe and kind of with the same point of view as a non-U.S. viewer. I was not familiar with the Manson murders. He knew that Manson was a cult leader and a murderer, but not much more. Only if you were interested in serial killers and American cults, you know the details, he says. I tried to stay away from the spoilers, too. This resulted in me not getting why we followed this young starlet who actually never became relevant to the story, as she was not involved in the final showdown. Furthermore, the intruder, who was supposed to be Charles Manson, didn't ring a bell, as I do not know what Charles Manson looked like when he was young, and there are killers whose motivation I do not get alone by watching this movie, although it is instantly obvious that they are dangerous. So, yeah, it is a possibility that the audience doesn't know the context and it results in an unsatisfying viewing experience. The movie seems like shards connected through something I'm not familiar with. So now that you've heard these two emails, Ben, I wanted to hear, like, do you still think that, like, this movie can work if you don't know?
So I think it works. I do think that, like, if you don't know anything at all, I think that it works on one level. But even who's the first person that emailed in? Gogol. He even said, once we saw the movie, my girlfriend and I both went home and read up on the Mansons and Tate, and suddenly the movie took on a whole new meaning for us. And I think that is, for something that's so hyper specific like this, I think that, yes, I guess this movie does require a little bit of homework. I came into it with a little bit of knowledge beforehand, but if you don't, I think Tarantino is just, this is such a hyper-specific movie, and it's Tarantino's fairy tale about this very, very specific time and place and event. And I think, if you don't understand that event, then yeah, you are going to miss something, and the movie may not be, or definitely will not be, as impactful for you as it is if you know that going in. But I do think, functionally, a lot of it still works. I think you might, even if you're expecting Sharon Tate to be involved in the final thing somehow, and like just because she doesn't wander into the house while the murders are happening or whatever, I still think she's involved in the climax of this movie because she
recognizes him.
Well, because the film sets her up as the initial target, and then Rick Dalton alters the plans a little bit, and they move next door to go to him, and then she's there at the conclusion to sort of welcome him in with open arms. So she is involved at the at the end of this movie. But are we even
clear, like, in the movie, just in the context of the movie itself and not history, are we even clear that she's the target?
Well, that's the thing, is, like, she never was, like her specifically in history and in this movie, as far as I remember, they never say like we are going out to kill Sharon Tate. They were trying to kill somebody else who they thought that house belonged to.
But I'm saying like in the storytelling of this movie, in how Tarantino presents it, like, does someone that doesn't know the story even know that that's where they are headed?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's the man. It's been a while it's been several weeks since I've seen this movie now. So I mean, I guess I can't answer that question definitively. But Brad, I'm interested. What do you think about these emails? What do you think about how the film works or doesn't or handles this without in terms of history?
It's a good question, and I do mostly agree with what you're saying about that the film does work even if you don't understand it, because there's plenty of times when there are in movies where we've seen two narratives that don't seem to be connected in any way, but then end up coming together in the end of the movie. And so I feel like the perspective of Margot Robbie's character not really have anything to do in the movie if you don't understand why Tarantino is showing us her living her life seemingly just on a normal day and not having anything consequential happen that really ties into the rest of the movie until the end isn't something that takes away from it, because at the end of the day, we're still talking about a movie where the majority of it is about the relationship between Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio's characters, which in itself isn't plot driven either, which is a big piece of criticism from those who haven't really liked the movie much. So I think focusing on that aspect really doesn't make much sense when the rest of the movie itself kind of just meanders and lets you sit in 1969 Hollywood. And while it does move towards this very violent ending and this fairy tale-esque beginning for something that never was allowed to happen in real history, I don't think that you need to know that real history to enjoy the movie, but if you do know it, it does add a whole other level of appreciation and satisfaction, probably.
I just feel like, and I've talked about this probably way at length in that spoiler discussion, but I do think that if you don't know the climax that the story is building to, it becomes a little bit, it probably becomes a little bit more unsatisfying along for that journey, because it just seems like people hanging out with each other.
Yeah, I mean, I totally see that, and I just think, hopefully what's happening here is what happened to Gokul, where people will go home and read up on it if they didn't know. And I think the other thing is, like, I understand wanting to avoid spoilers for a movie that you're really looking forward to, because I do that all the time as well. But like in all of the lead up to Tarantino making this movie, it was Tarantino's movie about the Manson murders. So like people had plenty of time to just familiarize themselves briefly, even just like a quick Wikipedia skim of the main events here to see what Tarantino is possibly working with. So I think there was
I'm
enough.
guessing people that want to stay spoiler free probably hear that and they're like, oh, I don't want to know anymore.
Yeah, but if you don't know what the Manson murders are at all, then when the movie happens the way it does, you're not going to be like, I didn't get that, because you're going to know that you purposefully avoided, getting the information that you needed to understand the movie. So I don't know. I guess there's one more point that I want.
I would agree with you, Ben, if it wasn't for Quentin Tarantino even saying the movie wasn't about the Manson murders.
Right, but I think that speaks to more to what Brad was just talking about. Like the movie, specifically is not like about them. It's about Rick and Cliff and these characters that inhabit this world. But I was thinking a lot about this question, and I thought it reminded me of when I was on the water cooler. I guess it was earlier this summer. I was talking about reading Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, which is a book that didn't really land on me because I didn't understand the historical context in which it took place. But Jacob was telling me, it's a book about the lost generation of World War I, and the main character, even though it's never explicitly stated in the book, it's heavily implied that he lost his genitals due to the war, and he has PTSD in an era before that was even named, and Hemingway himself had undiagnosed PTSD. So there's all this like context that I didn't go into that experience with, and so my initial read of the book left me a little bit unsatisfied, and I can totally see how this movie. People would go into this movie in the same way, but all you have to do is just look at it look up that stuff afterwards, and like Gokul, the movie takes on a whole new meaning for you once you familiarize yourself with the actual events.
I guess my question to you is, like, whose responsibility is that to relay that information? Like, should the storyteller set up that stuff so that you understand it and can fully enjoy it, without someone explaining it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like this is not like undercurrent stuff. Like, it's this is stuff that's needed to fully enjoy the story.
Well, I guess that's where we disagree, because I feel like you can enjoy the story on several different levels, even if you don't understand this stuff, and it's just like it's added bonus kind of material if you do. But I think you and I are just on a different side of the fence there.
I mean, I enjoyed the movie. I knew where it was headed, so I had no problem with that. But I've definitely talked to a fair share of people that did not get this movie, and some people that even walked out of it, and it was like the first movie they've walked out of in, decades. So I totally understand that as well. So anyways, okay, this brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find more of all our work at slashfilm.com. You can find links to the stories we talked about on today's podcast in the show notes. You can find this podcast published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com, and please leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention the email on the air. And please rate and read this podcast on iTunes, tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.